Hello, my friends. Today we are talking about the importance of awareness and managing stress as a caregiver. Coming up next on The Morning Care Show. Okay, well, today we are actually talking about the importance of awareness for stress and managing stress and the caregiver burnout cycle. Oftentimes jumps over this step because we have a lot of practices, a lot of strategies and things that we can use to try to decrease our stress. But oftentimes the very first step and very first aspect of managing that stress or even getting past that stress is the awareness of where it's coming from, how we're receiving it, and even more so, what we need to do once it starts to manifest or be created within us. The idea is to not avoid it, but rather embrace it almost, where we can actually step into the understanding of what is stressing us out. And that all really comes from awareness. So one of the things that it can do is it can show up in a lot of different ways. We don't always appreciate that stress can be not only physical, but certainly mental and emotional. I think there's an understanding of that, but we don't always appreciate that it can manifest in not just one of those ways, but all of those ways simultaneously. And so when we take a step back to get a better perspective, we can actually see where the physical and the mental and the emotional are all tied together and oftentimes will feed into one another in almost this crazy eight fashion. So we want to make sure that when we start to feel fatigue in our bodies, that we understand that sometimes there is that physical component of all the things that you're doing throughout the day that are contributing to that physical fatigue. And there are ways and strategies to navigate that, including proper nutrition, trying to get a little bit more rest. The idea, which sounds almost counterproductive or sounds almost opposite of what you would think, but sometimes exercise or some sort of fitness will actually allow us to work through that fatigue. Even though it seems like, well, if I'm so exhausted, I can barely stand, why would I exercise? Isn't that just going to make me more tired? And the reality is that part of fitness, part of exercising is actually moving some of the chemicals in your body that are contributing to that feeling of fatigue and the soreness and the tiredness. But if anyone has experienced that runner's high, not to say that you need to run a number of miles in order to experience it, but just in the sake that sometimes your body is releasing certain chemicals, certain dopamine and oxytocin and all these chemicals that are helping you to feel better and to emotionally lift some of that weight and that stress that would be compounding onto our body from different outside sources. Now, oftentimes we actually create a lot of stress internally because of the way we're thinking about things. And we need to also be aware that our thoughts are creating a lot of stress when they don't have to. There are physical aspects of stress, the carrying things around, moving people around. If you're a caregiver or a parent and you start to get that soreness in the lower back just from kind of hunching over and picking people up off the ground or helping them in and out of bed or anything along those lines, you can get those physical aspects of soreness and strain. But there is a mental component that we actually have control over. And it's really in our thoughts. The thoughts that we have in our head will dictate the feelings and the emotions that we have. So when we're talking about stress and managing stress being physical, mental, and emotional, the best part about this is that it's not three different battles, but rather it's really one interconnected battle or challenge that we can navigate our way through successfully. So there are ways to manage and cope with physical stress, but there's so many other ways of managing our mental state that will not only help us with the physical stress, but will help us through the emotional aspect of these things. And when we talk about fatigue, there are moments of physical fatigue, but the mental fatigue is usually what wears people down the most and affects not only the emotional state, but the physical state at the same time. So if you can get your mind a little course corrected, then you can actually find your way through a lot of those physical and the emotional stresses. So when we start to feel ourselves with decreased energy, we want to make sure that we're acknowledging that it's sometimes more of a mental state than a physical state. The feeling of this constant exhaustion can lead us down the wrong path, because sometimes we're thinking that it's a physical thing, and we start to supplement with caffeine and sugar and sometimes just other general foods that will help us feel better in the moment, or at least we believe they might feel better and we're feeling better in the moment. But what we're really doing is we're masking the situation. And by masking the situation, we're actually putting ourselves more into a cloud of misunderstanding of what is really happening. And so when we lean into that awareness of where it's really coming from, how we can navigate it, and what we need to do both in a physical, mental, and emotional aspect, we allow ourselves to step out of that cloud and get the clarity that we've actually needed this whole time. It can feel very heavy, and it can feel like this giant, solid burden on your back. And the reality is that most of the time, it's a lot of little things that are piling up into one giant mass, but because we're not aware of all the different components, we're actually creating one giant mass that seems almost impossible to manage or deal with. So we want to allow ourselves that space and that understanding and that grace to appreciate that if we can chip away little by little at different aspects, we can overcome what seemingly is this giant stress in front of us. Oftentimes we lose interest in things like activities, but it's really a mental state. We think that we're bored, we think that we're tired, we think that we're all these different states, but what we're doing is we're really trying to hide. We're trying to run away from the things that are uncomfortable. And if we can get our mind on to this understanding that the stress is what leads us to the overwhelm is what leads us to the burnout, and we can avoid that burnout completely by simply getting aware of where we are mentally and the things that we need to do to navigate this situation now before it turns into that overwhelm, before it turns into that burnout. And the impact of burnout on our health and well-being is so interconnected with the physical, the mental, and the emotional, that we don't always fully appreciate that one stress move, either towards or away from stress, can make a huge difference in our life. It can make a huge impact on whether we're actually feeling better in our day or feeling worse in our day, throughout our body, our mind, and I would even say our spirit. So, the aspect of, awareness in preventing burnout is so crucial, because like a map or any other navigational tool, if you don't know where you are, it's nearly impossible to get to where you want to go. So understanding that what you believe is the stress point right in front of you may not actually be the stress point. It may actually be more than that. It may be a few things compound together. Just as an experience, I was talking to the nurse for my grandmother, and I was frustrated and angry and stressed in a lot of ways about the hearing aids, and she didn't have her lower dentures in at the moment, and I was trying to figure out why those were not in at that time. And she had her glasses on, she had the oxygen on, and there was a list of excuses that I felt were unjustified excuses as to why she didn't have her hearing aids in, so she couldn't hear me when I was trying to talk to her and engage with her. I was worried that she wasn't able to eat properly because she didn't have her lower teeth in. And the reality was that I was more upset about the decline that she was going into than all these little pieces. But I put all these little pieces into this big pile and made it this overall cloud of stress that I was really not navigating in that moment. And it took me the ability to step back and take a breath and say, okay, what am I really thinking about right now? What is the most important aspect of this? Am I angry that someone's not doing their job because she doesn't have her hearing aids in or her teeth in? Or am I really angry at feeling a little bit of helplessness for the situation, that I could micromanage, I could do these little things, I could have this conversation with her, whether she's got the hearing aids in or not. Half the time she's not really responding to me. So it's heartbreaking. And that is creating this belief in my mind that if something were to fix that, then the problem would go away. And that's really not the case. Unfortunately, dementia, Alzheimer's, a lot of these cognitive diseases are really one-way streets. I would love to believe that the research is going to pick up fast enough that we can reverse some of this before it's too late for my grandmother. But I want to allow myself to acknowledge that that research still needs a little bit more time. And I do believe that there's a world coming up that a lot of the issues that we're facing now won't be so much the issue anymore. And I want to have that awareness that I can't rush that process, just as I can't fix the problem, the upset, anger, the understanding, the frustration that I'm feeling in my body is really coming from the inability to fix a problem that I want to force myself through. And understanding that is a cloud that is having me become lost in the forest. And instead of understanding that I could take this as a moment of opportunity, or I can step into something better, or I can stay lost and angry. And that's not really helping anybody. That's not helping the situation. Me yelling or screaming at nurses or aides for something that is not really the problem. You can have a judgment here or there about whether it is or isn't something that they should be doing, but it's not going to fix the problem at hand. And I realize that so often, that I'm getting mad and angry at the wrong things. It's this displaced anger has been a term that's come up a lot in my family, at least, where people are angry at one thing, but they take it out on another person or another situation, or it kind of festers in them and then they explode at an awkward moment that doesn't seem justified for the level of anger and intensity that has come out. And it's really this displaced anger that is happening. So part of how we can get through this obstacle of making sure that we're aware of where the stress is coming from is having some sort of self-monitoring happen. And sometimes that's as simple as taking a break from the moment and taking a breath so that you can slow down the nervous system. Even ever so slightly, it will make a difference, because it'll help you to see the whole picture, and change your perspective ever so slightly will help you monitor almost as an outside party. And so we can regularly check on ourselves almost as if we're talking to a friend. We can say, what's really going on? Or what's coming up at this time? What are you experiencing? What are the thoughts in your head that are making you feel this way? Because it's not the circumstance. It's not the hearing aids or the teeth or being in a wheelchair or being on oxygen. It's not the fact that she doesn't respond to me. Those are all circumstances. What thoughts are those creating that are creating these feelings inside of me that are stirring up in a negative way? These negative emotions will actually contribute to my negative feelings. These negative thoughts will contribute to my negative feelings, which will then give me a negative energy in my body that is not only counterproductive, but is really holding me back from seeing clearly, because it will put me into that fight or flight scenario, because I feel like the anger is coming up as a response, because I don't want to run away from the problem, even though I'm almost hiding from it. I don't want to run away from it, so I almost feel like I need to fight something. And all that anger and all that negative energy is detrimental, not only if it's external, if you're throwing it outside of yourself, but if you're pulling it in, it can be even worse on your system. It can actually start to deteriorate what's going on inside and start to almost give you that feeling of being gutted or punched in the stomach. And we don't want that. So we can do things, we can ask ourselves questions as if we're a friend talking to ourselves. What's going on? What's coming up? Or we can even take that to another level and journal about it. A lot of people rave and rant about journaling, but there's so much to getting the thoughts out of your head and onto a piece of paper that people don't always appreciate. It takes too much time. It takes too much energy. My hand hurts. I'm so angry I can't even sit still to write. There's a lot of excuses. There's so many excuses that people come up with. And the reality is that getting those thoughts out of your head and onto paper not only opens up that space and relieves the pressure of those thoughts in your head, but allows you to read them back, and almost as if you're another person reading someone else's mind, you can actually read the thoughts in a different way. And it will allow you that understanding, and here again, that awareness that is going to help you through the whole system. You know, you don't realize that a lot of people blame things to be triggers, but the reality is that things are not triggering you. You may be getting triggered, but you're getting triggered by the thoughts in your head. The circumstance is neutral. The situation is neutral. And you can make of it whatever you want. Now, it may be very difficult at times to understand how it could be framed in a positive way or find the silver lining. But the reality is that you have this control over your own mind and your own thoughts, that no matter what happens, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be something that will move you forward. It's just a matter of changing that obstacle into an opportunity, or changing that challenge into something that will allow you to grow and become stronger in the whole process. And we want to embrace that. We want those opportunities, even though they're uncomfortable at times. Oftentimes they're very uncomfortable, to the point where we want to get out of it as soon as possible. But if we allow ourselves to step into it a little bit more, then we actually will grow into the person that we needed to be to manage it right off the bat. And that puts us into another level of existence. That puts us into another understanding and a strength that will benefit us and the people around us as we move forward. So we want to practice being present in the moment. So when these things come up, journaling in that moment, not saying I'm going to write it down later, but journaling in that moment is going to be a huge benefit to so many people, because they don't even realize the language that is coming out of them, because they're keeping it up in their head. And oftentimes the voices in our head are not as clear as we think they are. They're very angry, they're very loud, they're telling us things that we're not really processing. And it's not until we put it outside of ourselves, whether we're talking out loud, whether we're writing it down, it's not until it leaves our body that it can actually be processed in a way that's going to help us understand what is happening and what's coming up in those moments. So we want to be present in that moment. And all of that, whether it be speaking out loud, whether it be writing things down, it's going to open up that space. It's going to relieve the stress. Your head is like a pressure cooker at times. And if you don't relieve the stress of those thoughts, it will explode, and it'll come out in different ways. It will manifest in either anger and aggression, or it'll start to make you sick to your stomach and maybe sick in your body. You can cause disease and malfunction in your body, your physical body, just from holding the upset, angry, negative thoughts in your head. And we have enough on our plate. We don't need to be sabotaging ourselves by throwing a monkey wrench into the system. So relieve that stress, relieve that pressure. Don't be the pressure cooker, waiting to explode. Find a way to relieve that stress, that pressure, that tension by simply either voicing it out loud. It doesn't have to be to anyone. If you have someone to talk to, awesome. But you can write it on a piece of paper and read it back to yourself, and sometimes even just writing it and putting it aside is good enough. But if you can write it down and read it back to yourself, you can actually start to understand from a slightly outside perspective what's really going on in your head. And that will help us to take that moment, put it down, so that we don't have to carry it with us throughout the rest of the day. And people don't understand how much they're carrying with them. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, you have all these different things happening. You have multiple thousands of thoughts going through your mind. And if you don't put them down, you are carrying with them. You're just stacking them one on top of the next. And you're carrying those with you throughout the day. And that could be a very heavy load to bear, and it's a burden throughout your day. The role of cortisol in our body, we wake up and our cortisol levels are raised automatically. And so we need to actually take a few moments to allow them to settle and regulate. But if we don't allow them to settle and regulate, we go through this chronic stress response throughout the day. Chronic, being that it's happening consistently and in a longer period of time than it was ever meant. Evolutionary wise, your evolutionary response is to keep yourself out of danger. So if you get a fright, if you jump, if a loud noise, if you feel the sense of falling, if you feel the sense of danger, that response is keeping you alive. And that's a wonderful response to have. People need that to stay out of danger. The problem is that when you live in that response, your body can, you can only slam on the gas and go into that red zone for a moment before things start to burn out, literally and figuratively. And then all of a sudden the machine is not going to work anymore. So when we can develop this awareness, it will feed into the understanding of our eating patterns and how we're fueling our body. I know as a response for myself, oftentimes in the past when I was super angry, I would watch things like horror movies, and all the anger that was coming up in my body, I would kind of step into those roles, and there was a lot of I don't know, there was a lot of aggression coming out, living vicariously through these horror figures. And it was definitely not the healthiest response, but that was what I did to cope. And it also allowed me to reframe it by saying life could certainly be a lot worse. I could be being chased by a hockey mask wearing giant with a machete, so maybe I can handle this situation. And so it would allow me to kind of slow everything down and put into perspective that even though those were fictional horror movies, that I could get myself through it. And so that was always a component. But planning your meals, planning your media consumption, planning, anything that you're intaking. If you're reading only medical articles because you're reading information and not entertainment, oftentimes that can actually it can go against you. It can work against you because you need your brain to be a little bit lighter in your thoughts at times, and research all the time, studying all the time can get very heavy because you're trying to retain information as if it's life or death. And sometimes you need to step away and watch a little brainless media, a movie or a show or something that's just entertaining or funny, or something that you can be a little bit more light about, and it's not so heavy with importance of retaining. And a lot of times people veg out as a response because they're dismissing what needs to be done. But there's a level of relaxation that we need to find when the rest of the world is aimed at us and is very heavy on our plate. So some practical strategies about maintaining health and your wellness in this awareness environment. You want to really set some goals. So if you know that you're going to respond negatively and you have that awareness, it will allow you to set up your day slightly differently, slightly better, just in the fact that you can anticipate and not go into it blindly having a reaction response. So when we can actually step ourselves into a mode of understanding, it allows us to see a clearer picture of where we're going. And you may not be able to see the entire path, but those next few steps, and when you can take those next few steps and you can actually see that you're doing something to step into. So when you're going down that path, you can actually see a little bit clearer, even the next few steps. You may not be able to see the whole path. You may not be able to see the whole day, how it will unfold. You can certainly have a little fantasy dream about how everything goes perfectly, but the likelihood of everything going perfectly, probably not so much. So when we can start to anticipate little hurdles, little obstacles, little challenges that are going to come along the way, it will make us more confident in what we're doing. It will allow us to take the steps a little bit stronger and a little bit more at ease, because we're not so worried about the ground falling out from under us. We're ready, and we can anticipate, though we don't want to live in a pessimistic, everything's going to go wrong mindset. There is a balance in there. There is a way of navigating through the path and down the path that does not have to be all or nothing. There's a lot to be said about this gray area of not everything going perfectly, but not believing that everything is going to go wrong. And as we were starting to mention before, integrating physical activity will actually help some of those chemicals that are keeping you stuck in that physical, mental, emotional stress. Physical activity has so many elements of value to it, that if you allow yourself a little bit of movement, your blood starts to flow, and the chemicals that are getting stuck in your body can actually start to move around a little bit, and some other chemicals are being released that will help you calm down, will help you feel better, literally feel better physically, but also just calm down the nervous system so that you can get your thoughts straight and you don't have that brain fog. And that oftentimes leads us to an emotional aspect of really being able to navigate our next steps with confidence, rather than this fight or flight stress that is fearful. We don't want to step forward in fear. Fear is not something that we want to run away from, but fear is not something that we need to hold on to. In fact, fear is going to come up, and if we acknowledge it and we're aware of maybe where it's coming from, we can step through that fire without getting stuck in it. And certainly building a support system is so important. we believe that we're on this journey alone, and there's so much isolation involved, especially when you're caregiving, or if you're a single parent, or your life is almost revolving around another human being. It can get exhausting, uh, because you feel like the entire burden is on you, and most elements are going to be on you. Most aspects of what needs to get done may fall on your plate, but that doesn't mean you're alone. And developing the relationships and the community and the outreach of someone who may have not necessarily the answer to a problem or a situation, but the understanding. Because oftentimes what we're really looking for is someone who actually understands what we're going through, what we've gone through, what we're experiencing. We don't want the sympathy. Nobody wants to feel like they're this victim, but that's oftentimes the response that we get when we're reaching out, because we just need to talk about things. We just need to talk to somebody to not feel like we're all alone, all on our own. We are not alone. I mean, there's millions of caregivers out there. There's millions, billions of people that are parents, that have an understanding of being up all night, that have an understanding of things that you don't know what you're doing until you're figuring it out in real time. And that is a very stressful situation. But if you step into it knowing, I'm going to figure this out, and you can get your mind on, you get your head on straight, get your mind focused on getting through and accomplishing and finding the outcome that you need to find, and navigating your way down the path. No matter what challenges you face, you're stepping into a whole world that would give you this opportunity to grow into a person that's more capable than you were when you started. So we need to not only have communities, but we need to communicate properly. We don't need sympathy. We don't need someone to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for you." We don't need people trying to fix the problems. Oftentimes what we're really looking for is empathy. We need someone who actually understands what we're going through, so that we don't feel alone. What we're looking for is a sense of not being alone. And when people try to fix the problems, when people feel bad for us, when people give us nothing but sympathy, it makes us feel even more so. At least it did for me. It made me feel even more so isolated, because then I feel like I'm the outsider and everyone else is looking at me as a victim. And when I start to believe that everyone is looking at me as a victim, then I start to believe that I am a victim. And that was not true. I convinced myself of it many times, almost because I just let them tell me that I'm a victim and I deserve better. And it's like talking to that friend about your relationship, and instead of supporting the relationship, they immediately tell you to get out, run away, and don't look back. That's not always what we need. We need someone to help us process the thoughts that are in our head. So that's all part of it. So when we practice things like self-compassion, we're allowing ourselves that space for that understanding and that awareness. And it's so important, it's so vital to appreciate that sometimes we're not going to have a perfect success. There's going to be trip ups, there's going to be stumbles, there's going to be falling, but it's a matter of getting up and keep going that we really need. And the compassion is going to come from the understanding that no matter what hits us, we can always get back up and keep moving forward. Now, there's going to be some things that are landslides coming down on us, and it may take a little bit more to get past. But as long as we still have air in our lungs, as long as we are still breathing and we are able to open our eyes every morning, we have another opportunity to keep moving forward. That's really what we need, is to keep moving forward. We need to keep growing. You see these pictures of these trees that have been struck by lightning or, knocked over by a storm, and they didn't give up. Some of them died. Some of them exploded in a lightning storm. And yet some of them almost burned down to a nub. But you still see a little shoot come up, and then it's blossoming into a whole nother tree. There's opportunity in every obstacle. It doesn't feel like it a lot of the times, but if we allow ourselves to look, and then we can gain that understanding and that awareness that there's something else that can come from this. It doesn't always have to be pain. Pain may be the initial response. Frustration, anger, these are all forms of pain and fear, but something else can come out of it. Something greater, something positive. And if we step forward into this awareness that everything in life is a circumstance, and we can't control the circumstances, but we can control the thoughts in our head. And sometimes we feel like we can't, but if we take that breath and we slow ourselves down, we take a step back, we can form the thoughts that we want to have, and those will generate the feelings that we want to feel. They may still be battling with some of the stuff that organically came up, but we have the ability to brush that off and step forward into the reality that we want to keep living and the way that we want to keep going. Huge wind gust may push you off the path. There may be a pit in front of you that you need to walk around. There may be a branch that falls and you have to jump out of the way of. But that doesn't mean that we abandon the path that we're on. That means we find our way around or through or over and get back on that path, and we keep moving forward. And the further along the path and the further down that path that we get past the obstacle, the less it bothers us. And that's where that concept of time healing all wounds, it may still be in your mind in some ways, but the further down the line you move, the less that obstacle has a hold of your thoughts. And the more you can move on and let it go, and the more you can grow and succeed and become the person you need to be for the next challenge, the one that's better, and the one that grew and now has an understanding of what it took to get past one thing, and has that new skill, that new ability, and has grown enough that the next challenge may be a little bit easier. And that's really what we're looking for. And though we may all be on different paths, if you look around, you're not alone. And that's the important thing. You have to remember that you're not alone. Be aware of what is really happening. Pain, whether it be physical, whether it be emotional, whether it be, even mental anguish, is giving us a signal that something is out of alignment. And so when we take that and we look at it and we start to have that understanding and that awareness, we actually allow ourselves to use that as what it was meant for, which is a signal to tell us to do something differently, whether it's have a different thought in our head. If you touch a stove and you hurt yourself physically and you have that pain, then you know not to touch the stove. When you have thoughts in your brain that are causing you mental anguish, which are then causing you heartbreak, you have an opportunity to say, wow, that thought really hurt me. Maybe I can move away from that thought. Maybe I don't have to go back to that thought. Maybe I have the opportunity to reframe it in a way that I can find that's a positive. And if maybe not a full positive, at least a way that I can find value in it through learning, through growing, through understanding, even through helping someone else that is about to experience what I just did. And having that awareness of the value that can come out of any circumstance will lead us to a place that is a lot lighter and a lot less stressful. And when we have less stress, we have less overwhelm. When we have less overwhelm, we can avoid burning out the way that so many of us have done before. I've burned out many times, and I've recovered. And I went forward down that path, and I learned from my experiences, but then something happened, and sometimes I forgot the lessons that I learned. And I got stuck in that same trap of the thoughts steering me down into a pit. And so I know that things that are new and scary and uncertain can be very heavy. And when I reel myself in and I put myself back into that understanding and that awareness that I have been through so much, and I know that I can overcome whatever challenge is in front of me, it gives me a confidence, a self-confidence that I can handle this. And it's when I have that belief in myself, everything else becomes lighter, and it allows me to step forward into a better life, a happier life, a more joyful life. I can appreciate and be grateful for so much more. I want to live in the moment and navigate myself through, but I don't want to get caught up in the riptide. I want to learn from my mistakes. I want to make sure that I'm navigating the waves and not trying to fight them every step of the way. And I want to remember that I may be on my own path, but I'm not alone. If I look around, there's a lot of people that are on paths not too far off from mine. It's what I wanted to tell you today. You're not alone. Make sure that you have the awareness of where the pain is coming from, and whether it be physical or mental or emotional, you have the ability to navigate your way through it. And I believe in you. I know that you can do this. And when our cup is emptied and we are struggling and running on fumes, if we remember that when we take care of ourselves, we can give better to others and we can live better in the world, it will change everything. I love you. You're doing a fantastic job. I believe in you, and you can do this. I'll talk to you next time.
Hi, guys. It's Fred. I just wanted to thank you one more time for joining me on today's episode. It really means the world to me that I can offer any sort of value. If you had any great takeaways from today's episode, I would love to hear about them in the comments below. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop those too. I'll see you next time. Make sure that you like and subscribe so that you can get notified of all the new episodes coming out. We're going to try to produce them as much as possible to create as much love and support in the caregiving space as we possibly can. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.